All right, Craig, fire up the bleep button. Here we go. Can you imagine if I said that? Are you kidding me? You guys would murder me if I said that. I'd never hear the end of that. That's what you do. That's not his problem. That's your problem. His problem isn't to figure out how to make you money. You signed a deal with this kid. Your job is to promote him. You made a deal. All these kids that I signed, if you look at all the kids that we signed, our roster is very inflated right now. We have a very big roster right now, the biggest we've ever had in the history of the company. I have to pay these kids. How I pay them is not their problem. It's my problem. And with that, welcome to Stoppage, show where the news of the day is usually just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you and get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin, and I'm joined as always by the godfather of Fight Night Picks, Craig Allen. Craig, how are you?
John, I'm well. I'm excited for this week's episode. I'm in the Combat Corner, and I'm sure there's another show named that, so I don't want to steal their name. But, hey, I've never shot anything in this corner of the room. Let's go for a tour. I mean, before the show, you and I did, but I've got my Conor Khabib poster. I've got Volkan Smith, UFC Moncton. I've got the flag, the Hoist Gracie flag. Like, I'm having a lot of fun over here. Matt and I just shot our Bellator 253 preview. Matt did his first media day ever, and he was so excited because, topping the card, and I mean, it's not even at the top, but you got Caldwell McKee at the top. But in the co-main event, one of my favorite fighters of all time, I know he's one of Matt's, and I know he's from a spot that's close to you. He got to talk to Benson Henderson, so he's pretty excited about that. I was excited for him. He had a lot of fun. So, yeah, maybe if you didn't get a chance to check it out, check it out. Next time, we're going to try and figure out a way to stream it because I know every other media outlet did, but old Fight Night Picks didn't know how. And it was Matt's first time. He's just learning. It's his, first or second week full-time with Fight Night Picks. So either way, we're having a lot of fun. I'm gassed up. I'm excited about this show. John, how are you?
I can't quite match that energy, but I'm feeling good. I look like you're in the combat corner. I look like I'm in a combat zone. I am in the gazebo outside because you can do that kind of stuff in Phoenix, Arizona. You just hang out outside all year round. So I'm outside in our gazebo. A long story as to why I'm here, which we'll get to some other day. But, Craig, on this episode of Early Stoppage, we talked the return of Dillashaw, the heavyweight GOAT, changing promotions, and the greatest month in MMA history. But we begin with UFC Fight Night 183, a.k.a. UFC on ESPN Plus 41, a.k.a. UFC Vegas 14, a.k.a. UFC Fight Night RDA versus Felder. Craig, Felder looked good under the circumstances, but it was RDA's night. He was dominant and saved one controversial scorecard. He ran away with it. In the aftermath, he called out Conor McGregor, who responded by saying he had some business to attend to or has some business to attend to with Dustin Poirier, but they would hook him up eventually. So let's spin this forward for all three fighters. Should Felder go back into retirement? Is RDA a real threat at 55, and is he worth Conor's time?
I don't know if he's worth Conor's time. I mean, you got Conor and you got Poirier, and that conversation's going to happen until, January? So we'll find out what happens there. As far as Paul Felder's concerned, he was really competitive. For a guy that took the fight on less than a week's notice, he went in there. The weight cut wasn't a huge issue. I'm glad with what he did after the fight where he called out everybody that missed weight. That includes the Louis Smolkas, the Eric Anders, and so on and so forth. You're damn right. If those guys are missing weight and they have plenty of time to get ready for that fight, there's no reason why they couldn't if Paul Felder could make it. There's only one fight that I really see as halfway competitive in the top 15 for Paul Felder. I don't want to see him out there against a guy like Dan Hooker. I'd sooner see him against Raging Al, New York's #1 real estate agent. That's the only fight that I see is making a whole lot of sense. And then if I can really answer the question on RDA, I mean, he looked pretty sharp. His wrestling was on point. We didn't really get to see the whole jiu-jitsu aspect of it, but his wrestling was good. His cardio was great. Physically, he looked great. And I mean, Matt and I kind of in the build-up when we were making our picks, it was like, yeah, RDA's got to cut weight. And everybody kind of said that too. Well, you can't forget about it. Rafael dos Anjos has been fighting at 70 for, the past number of years. It's going to be a hard cut for him too. I'm not a guy that likes to look into a fighter's social media all that much, but he looked good in the weeks and I would say even months leading up to this fight. He looked like he took it more than serious. This is a guy that's been a champion. He's been around for a very long time. He's fought the who's who for the longest time. So you knew RDA was going to be a consummate professional make weight. Of course he did, but I thought his performance was good. It was a short notice change for him as well. going from Makhachev to Paul Felder, who's still a game opponent. So for me, RDA definitely is a real threat. He enters the rankings this week at number 6. I think that's more than fair. And maybe a Dan Hooker RDA fight. Now that one makes sense. But as far as RDA Connor, I just don't see that one happening.
Yeah, we have a podcast coming up soon. I won't spoil too much, but Craig and I have kind of been knocking it around. RDA is going to be the subject of one of the podcasts because he's had a very interesting career. He went from this guy who was kind of like a journeyman, and all of a sudden, pre-USADA, he's looking pretty good, winning belts and calling everybody out. I mean, he's got a history of he's the reason Red Panty Night's even a thing. It was even ever said. Then he breaks his foot, and he loses the greatest opportunity, the greatest payday probably ever. Listen, if you look at this guy's resume, like he's fought everybody. So I think if you're him, you're at a stage in your career now where it's like, how many, and I hate this term, I know you're not crazy about it either, but how many big money fights can I book? And if all those things end up resulting in another shot at the title, well, then great. And if I can stumble into a 170 double champ situation or win the 55-pound belt again, fantastic. But I just think that he needs to really, and kind of similar to what Paul Felder does and what a lot of fighters do when they retire, just kind of lay back and let these fights come to you and find the right one. I think the kid's never ducked a fight. You don't get a resume like that by ducking fights. So I like what he's done with his career so far. He's got a belt. I'm going to make this real simple in terms of looking at his career. You think he's a Hall of Famer?
Well, I mean, he didn't defend, so he's a one-time champ. He fought a who's who. He beat champions in different weight classes. Like he had the Robbie Lawler win in a main event. No. Does he have Hall of Fame worthy fights? Maybe, but is he a Hall of Famer? No.
The interesting thing, I'm going to put him in the Hall of Fame because of his resume. I think that when you're putting together the Hall of Fame highlight package, there's a lot of guys you can put staring across the octagon from him that sort of build that Hall of Fame resume. Now let's get to Paul Felder real quick before we move on. Listen, I'm going to take umbrage with Felder. I've taken umbrage with Felder before. We've had some social media back and forth here and there. Small ones, nothing big. But, him calling out fighters, I get it. But here's my problem with it. You work for the UFC or ESPN, however you want to look at it. You're kind of a company man. And so from that perspective, it looks like you're carrying their water, even if you might not be. But from the other perspective, I think that, you got to put a little bit of stock in the fact that not everybody's built like you. Not everybody's Paul Felder. Not everybody's, the best line of all of Fight Week was when they said that, Paul Felder took the fight on short notice. Dean Thomas tweeted, Philly guys will fight you over a losing lottery ticket, which is, listen, my old man's a Philly guy. I know about Philly guys. I know about Philly people. And that's who Paul Felder is. So I think holding everyone to your standard is a little bit unfair, but I do think that we'll get to weight cutting and weight issues later and how to solve the UFC situation. I do think there's a remedy for it. I don't think Paul Felder calling people out is the remedy.
And I just want to ask you one question before we move on too far, because it seems like the Fight Night Picks fans, whether it's in podcast form on iTunes, Spotify, or it's on YouTube in the visual version, the Fight Night Picks fans aren't just fight fans. Like Twitter fans, MMA, Twitter's just MMA, and you can't talk about anything else, or it's an unfollow and the follow trains and all that stuff. The YouTube fans and the podcast fans, they get me. They understand. I've got a Michael Chavis bobblehead where he's raking some leaves. That's pretty cool. Portland Sea Dogs. I've got Brett Laurie behind me. I'm a multi-sport guy. We're talking Hall of Fames. John, I'm going to list 4 names. You tell me if they're Hall of Famers. Okay. Pete Rose, Roger Clemens, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGuire. Hall of Famers?
They're not. No, they're not in the Hall of Fame
yes,
right
they
now.
Are.
They're not in the Hall of Fame right now. I thought this is what you were asking. Do their accomplishments on the field deem they should be in the Hall of Fame? Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, now, John, let's move on. Speaking of Pete Rose, no, I'm kidding. Speaking of Conor McGregor, he has the aforementioned fight with Dustin Poirier, but Dana White came out this week and said that it won't be for a title because Khabib is fighting. So, John, the question's simple. Do you think Khabib is fighting? And if so, why?
This is a really tough one. And most times, because all you have to do is solve the simple equation of what are they coming back for, right? What would GSP come back for? Why does he hang around? What brings Conor McGregor back? What would bring Paul Felder back? You can start to, do a simple equation and figure these things out. Khabib, more than anyone else, is true to his word almost stubbornly. And I think that, it gets interesting for him. I can't read him. I guess the larger question I have is, if he's already said he doesn't want to fight, listen, Dana's a promoter, and we all know what promoters are and what they do. But, on the one hand, you got to say to yourself, why not just leave the guy the hell alone? He made it very clear why he doesn't want to fight. It's not some guy like Felder. Listen, I don't want to take more shots at Felder because he did say family stuff too. So, it's not a guy like Cejudo, we'll use as an example, who just feels like he's accomplished everything. There's nothing left for him to do. Cejudo didn't really have the family thing pulling him away. He didn't have something else pulling away. He just kind of walked away. Khabib has some really deep-rooted reasons why he doesn't want to fight. So why would you then leverage whatever situation you have with Khabib to get him back in the cage? Whatever that is, if it's money, if it's whatever, challenges, So, yeah, I think he'll fight because I think Dana will dangle the right carrot. But I just wish Dana wouldn't dangle a carrot.
I gotta say it's weird. I rag on the UFC's rankings, and a lot of people say, oh, well, they don't really mean a whole lot. They take Leon Edwards out of the welterweight rankings. They force his hand, rubber arm him. Then he's in a fight with Khamzat Chimaev. Now Leon Edwards is ranked 3rd in the welterweight division again, and Khamzat Chimaev is your 15th ranked fighter. Now they can sell a fight based on those rankings. Isn't it weird that, certain fighters retire and they're out? Henry Cejudo says, I'm going to retire. He's out of the rankings. Khabib says, yep, I'm done. I'm hanging him up. He's still considered your champion at lightweight, and he's also your number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. Conor McGregor is the 11th ranked pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC. Donald Cerrone is no longer ranked in the welterweight division. Conor McGregor's last one was Donald Cerrone at 170. And Conor's also ranked the 4th best lightweight in the world. How fucking stupid are these rankings? They don't make any sense. So I've already cursed a couple times. Normally I keep it locked tight. Now I have to bleep myself. But if I look at this question, we've kind of circled the wagons with Khabib and GSP a number of times. It's weird, though. I mean, Dana White's kind of selling, I wouldn't say selling wolf tickets to 2021, but is that fight really official with Conor and Dustin? Is Khabib really retired? It seems like we're just kind of throwing stuff at a board and seeing if it's going to stick at this point.
I'm going to say this, just one last thing, with all due respect to Khabib and his career and all that. And I've been very critical of his career in the past in terms of the number of times he's been a main card, the number of times he's defended his title, stuff like that. But really, in my mind, there's nothing really all that much left for him. Conor and Poirier, the winner of that fight, if you want to run it back, sure, it'll make money. I know why Dana wants to do Khabib Conor too. Khabib seems very uninterested in it. For me, it's Tony Ferguson and George St. Pierre. If he's not fighting one of those guys, I'm out. So, I mean, unless Dana can put that fight together, and if he's still holding on to Conor McGregor, Khabib too, listen, man, we've talked about the toxicity of some of these rivalries, and we'll get to it in our sparring sessions. But I just don't need to see that fight. All right. Speaking of Khabib Nurmagomedov, kinda, Craig Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who was once rumored to be an opponent of Khamzat Chimaev, came out this week and said his theory on why Chimaev is getting the old promotional push, there's our Chael reference, is because the UFC is looking to replace Khabib Nurmagomedov with another fighter of Russian descent to satiate the Russian fan base. I'm paraphrasing here. Craig, is Wonderboy onto something here or what?
If the UFC wanted to satiate the Russian fan base, then the UFC would just take the PFL model, link up with Dominance MMA, and sign every single guy they could from Chechnya, Dagestan, and the surrounding areas. And I mean, to an extent, they're doing it, right? I mean, I don't want to get into geographical politics and this and that and have those arguments kick off. But you have Zabit Magomedsharipov, you have Zubair Tukhugov, you have Islam Makhachev that could be marketed or could be pushed. They're a part of the stable with Khabib. I know that we were supposed to get that push from Islam last weekend in the main event. Unfortunately, he was out, and hopefully we get to see him back soon. But to answer the question, it's a little tricky. I guess he's on to something there to really answer the question. But Khamzat's kind of his own thing. Yeah, he does the whole smash and this and that. But he comes from a totally different gym at this point in his life. He's training out of all-stars with the Gustafsons and, to a grander extent, we have a lot of big-name fighters coming out of that gym. Gokhan Saki's another one of them. But overall, he kind of seems like his own guy. Khamzat's his own fighter. I know we're going to draw comparisons, the beard and some of the things. And I think maybe to an extent, Khamzat's kind of trying to take that Khabib game plan. He's seen it used. So if it worked for Khabib, it could work for Khamzat. But to me, he's his own guy. I hold him in kind of a different class.
Yeah, I see why Dana would run with this kid. I guess my question is like you said, you mentioned Zabit. If it's so important, if this market is so important, why is Zabit kind of just floating out in the air, not fighting? All these rumors, all this stuff, and he may have something booked now, but I mean, it's like seems like forever in between fights, and it's like so there can't be that level of immediacy when it comes to this. I'm with you. I do think Khamzat is leaning into it more than Zabit does, and I do think that he wants to be. There's a part of him that wants to be a star as well as a fantastic fighter. There's a part of him that wants to maximize these things, and he understands the value of his skill set. With that being said, I do think he brings a lot of interesting things to the table with him being of the descent that he has, and then also, like you said, fighting at Augustus's gym. So now he has a couple of different demographics that he's meeting for the UFC. I'm with Thompson. I guess I'm not all the way with him. I see it. He's obviously more privy to it than we would be. He's a company man in his own right. He does commercials for the UFC. He kind of is in that orbit of some of those Forrest Griffin, certain types of guys.
Mike Perry.
Mike Perry. All those company men of the UFC. I could see it, but I think that I don't know that Chimaev will accomplish what Thompson seems to think he will.
All right, well, John, we'll move on from Khamzat Chimaev to one of the biggest movers and shakers from this week. And John, the greatest heavyweight of all time is on the move. Well, let me rephrase that, because I get about 5 to 6 PFL promotional emails a week from Lauren Mack, and most of them I just go, swipe, see you later. But this one really hit me different, just like ocean spray cranberry juice. And the PFL anointed the greatest heavyweight of all time, and he's on the move, and it is Fabricio Werdum, because he signed with the On the Ropes promotion that we seem to talk about every week. John, how big of a signing for the PFL is this? How big is Werdum to the PFL?
I think that when you sign a guy like Werdum, it gives you legitimacy a little bit. But then again, once he's in the door, you run into the same problem that Bellator runs into when they sign guys with big names. Who are they going to fight? Right? Okay, we got Mousasi here. We got Roy McDonald. We have this guy. Who are they going to fight? And can we promote them against one of our guys? Or do we have to bring in another big name to fight them? When you look at a guy like Werdum, do you just put him into a heavyweight Grand Prix? Or do you book him in super fights? I think that the PFL has a model where they can, and they try to do this in the past. Or maybe it was Bellator. Some promotions tried to do this in the past where they would have their tournament structure and then they would also have kind of super fights that were completely out of the super fight. The tournament style. I think they could do that here. I think that you just bring in guys for Werdum, because listen, it depends on how you look at it. Do you think that Werdum would just have a cakewalk to the million?
Yep. Yeah, I do. And it's like their heavyweight division, they try and market it because it's exciting. You know how the season structure works. The quicker the finish, the more points you get. I'm looking at last year's champ who went into the season at 4-0 in Ali Isaev, 36 years old, 4-0 heavyweight. He beat Valdrin Estrefi, Karl Suman Nutafa, Dennis Goltsov, Kevin Tiller, and the finals on New Year's Eve. And don't get me started about having fights on New Year's Eve. You're not going to get anybody to watch them. He fought Jared Rosholt, the castaway from the UFC that's, at the end of his career. And they fought to the most boring 4th round ground and pound finish you've ever seen. Ali Saev, kudos to you. You're 36 years old. Most people probably didn't know about you in MMA, and you won $1 million. Cool. But overall, Fabricio Werdum, I like what you're saying. I do. I think, having Legends fights is awesome outside of the season format. Like what Kayla Harrison did in their first season. There was no women's lightweight division, so they just had her having fun fights, and they put her on the finals or the finale on New Year's Eve and had her have a fight. She didn't make $1 million. She didn't get a belt, but still big deal. And then the second season rolls around, they build it around her, and she makes $1 million at the end. I think this is an easy million for Werdum unless he shows up and lays an absolute egg. But I mean, fun fights would be great. But if I'm Werdum, I'm like, hey, fun fights have to equal $1 million for me, because you know that if you put me in that tournament, I'm going to win it anyway.
Yeah, it gets interesting for me because there's a couple. I mean, the reason you bring a guy like Werdum in is several reasons. They're very obvious. One, he draws eyes. Two, if someone beats him, that person's automatically a star. I think that I'm gonna go way out of the box for this one just to kind of end the segment. I think that you give him some weird extra thing that he has to do. Like maybe Werdum gets a bonus for a first round finish, or maybe like you had to challenge this guy in a unique way. I don't think the million's enough. And that sounds crazy to say, but I just think that you gotta bring something else. Because I think that he thinks the same thing that you think, which is he cakewalk to the final in the million. So you gotta bring some extra wrinkle into it that makes it interesting.
Would you have sooner seen Werdum Fedor 2 than this?
I like PFL. I like everything PFL is doing except for their roster. So I like him in this situation. I just don't like who he's going to be fighting. So I think that, listen, man, Fedor is one of those guys where I used to have this running joke with buddies of mine where we talk about fighters and be like, okay, how old does this person have to be for me to be able to beat their ass? Like, how old does Mike Tyson have to be for me to be able to take him in a fight? Literally, is it like 65, 70 before today, at my age, could beat him up? Like, realistically. So when you look at a guy like Fedor, he's always kind of in the game, right? He hasn't quite shown up. He's lost, but he hasn't yet had us worry about his health. That's the same way I feel about Shogun. Like, Shogun keeps fighting and fighting and fighting. There's only been a couple times when I was like, oh, man, he shouldn't be in there. Some guys, you see that much earlier. So, yeah, I think Werdum Fedor would have been interesting. Anytime those two are across from each other, based on what happened the first time, it's always going to be interesting. But I think I'd rather see Werdum in a PFL structure. All right, Craig, cool. Let's move on. Tony Ferguson wants a fight. He wants it with Michael Chandler, and he wants it next month. For his part, Chandler says, sounds good, but I'll see you in January. Craig, what's the deal here? Is Chandler a mall Santa, or am I missing something? I mean, you finally got to the big show, and you're making people wait. I don't get it.
He's hanging out with our buddies at MMA on Point too much. He's hanging out with Jason at Tennessee. They're having fun. No, and that shouts to the boys. They're really doing a good job over there. And I tune into a lot of their content. You can find me in the chat. No, if I look at this, Michael Chandler's just trying to figure out exactly the prime thing that's going to work for him. And I think Dana White's all in on it too. The only trouble is Michael Chandler isn't 28. He's 34. And the longer he waits, the worse it gets. Now, against a guy like Tony Ferguson, maybe not so. Tony Ferguson's in that same, vintage, I guess, if you want me to put it that way. So they're roughly the same age. The longer they wait, it's not going to really change the result of the fight all that much. I don't see why. Like, they should wait until January to make this fight. I think having this as a co-main to Dustin, if Dustin and Connor fight, I would assume that's for the vacant belt. And then you have these guys fight, and there's your number one contender. Forget about Gaethje. He's on the shelf. Forget about Hooker. Forget about everybody else, even RDA at this point. Just do that. You're going to have a lot of animosity between those four guys. I think it would be great. That's the play. But, I mean, with Michael Chandler, yeah, I don't think he's really done himself a huge favor, because he's the alternate for the big fight, and then he goes out and talks a big game. He pops on the mic at the pay-per-view, says a couple things. All right, cool. But then every time it seems like somebody wants to fight him, he goes, well, I got a bigger plan. And to me, it seems like he's just, I know he's trying to deflect it, but it seems less of a deflection and more of a dodge. Like, it's just kind of odd.
Yeah, so listen, 2020 has sucked. We can all agree on that. And nobody wants to train / fight during the holidays. I get it. You don't want to miss Thanksgiving dinner in a year that sucked because you're training. You don't want to miss Christmas with the family because you're training, or have it be, sacrificed in any way. I get it. Michael Chandler, you, sir, are a freshman. And this is what I mean by that. I mean that you might have been king shit in junior high, but you're in high school now. You might have been king shit in high school, but you're in college now. And you just got here. So you can't call the shots like you're still in Bellator. You can't make the moves and dictate. You're not, you don't have the relationship with the UFC that you have with Bellator. You don't have the clout. You don't have the cachet. Just because you're a big name free agent and everybody's wondering what the hell you're going to do, you're still the new kid on the block, man. You got to play the game a little bit. Tony Ferguson is what is it, 12-1 in his last 13?
Yeah.
In the last 10 years, last decade? He shouldn't have to wait for you. And I say that with all due respect to who you are and what you've accomplished. Tony Ferguson should not have to wait for you in the UFC. It should be the other way around. So, listen, all I'm saying is, if you're coming on, come on.
Thank you for the Harold Clarence Howard. Man, I love it. All right, John. Now it gets bad. And this is a tough subject, but we have to address it. And as a result of last week's BKFC 14, Francesco Ricci is fighting for his life after being placed in a medically induced coma due to injuries sustained by a punch to the throat in the first round of his fight with Noah Cutter. Cutter didn't mean to do it. He said as much. It was an accident. And accidents happen in the fight game. So, John, the real question here is this some sort of indictment on bare-knuckle boxing, kind of the slights that they get and the news stories that have come out in the aftermath of this one? Or is this just something that normally flies under the radar? Like, injuries like this seem to happen under just usual circumstances. What's your take here?
All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that I do not find this funny in any way, but that was a very clunky transition that we just had, and I got a little bit of a kick out of that. So let's get to the matter at hand, which is bare-knuckle boxing, and should this be an indictment on it? These things, by the grace of God, nothing like this has really ever happened in MMA, at least, in a high level. So is it an indictment on boxing, bare-knuckle boxing? I don't think so, because these sort of things have happened in traditional boxing. Queensberry rules, if you will. And those are padded gloves. Now, what are fighters doing to those gloves? Who knows? But, or at least what did they used to do to them? Who knows? We've had deaths. We've had guys getting comas. We've had all kinds of stuff that happens in boxing. Now, the argument that people would make is the difference between the UFC and BKFC, and I don't know a lot about BKFC and boxing, is that there's repeated trauma to the head in boxing, whereas if you get cracked a couple times in the UFC, somebody's stepping in. And that's the whole point. That's why I fell in love with the sport, is that if you end up getting cracked and you go to the ground, you are getting pounced and someone's going to call it. It's not going to be you're going to go to the ground. Somebody's going to see, do you know what day it is? Do you know what your middle name is? And then, okay, I guess you're fine to fight still. And then you get cracked some more and get knocked down. So I do think it is cause for pause in the situation and say, okay, is this something that would have happened under other circumstances, or did the nature of this fight lead to this situation? If that's the case, then I really think they need to revisit it. I mean, because in the end, all they're doing is building a brand, right? And is it a great brand in bare knuckle boxing? I don't know about great, but it has some visibility in the world. But if they have to transition that brand to something different, they're already in place. They're already there. And if they have to transition out of bare knuckle boxing for something that's not their fault necessarily, I think the brand can still survive. You pray for this kid, but I really think they need to do their homework and see how much of the bare knuckle nature of this led to the situation.
It's really tough to answer. And I mean, in full transparency and full honesty, I didn't watch BKFC last week. And I know Luis Palomino was in the main event. He's a fun fighter watching MMA. You see his fights with Justin Gaethje. But overall, my journey with bare knuckle is a weird one, because when BKFC 1 came out, I thought, oh, this is really stupid. I'm not going to watch it. Then I watched that Vice documentary, and they really focused on Sam Shoemaker, how he wasn't like your traditional boxer, MMA guy. He was like a true blue bare knuckle boxer. He goes in there and wins. Like, I thought, okay, well, that's pretty cool. People can rally around him. I'll pay attention to the next one. So I watched BKFC 2. Way back when Fight Night Picks was starting up, we used to have a radio show. And one of the requirements so that we could get paid was that we had to do like these events. So one Friday, we had this event, and it was a whole day thing. My co-host Ty O'Keefe and I, who's no longer with us, so shouts to Ty, but we did this event where we had to have different fighters on. So we booked Tony Lopez. We booked Christina Marks. It was on The Ultimate Fighter. She had a fight in Bare-Knuckle. It was with WBKFF. We did this whole day about it. I got pretty psyched about it. And then ultimately WBKFF, it went up in flames. You know, Johnny Hendricks was on that. Who else? Phil Baroni was on it, fought Chris Lieben. And then there was issues about payment, and Boss Rutan was involved. And anyway, it was just really weird. All that to say, after that, I couldn't be bothered with Bare-Knuckle. You know, I watched the Artem Lobov Jason Knight fight. I watched a couple other things. I might see highlights, but to me, I don't know how big they can grow. They've already had their Paulie Malignaggi fight. I think that's the biggest name they could ever have. They blew their wad there. They're never going to get bigger than that. So it's unfortunate because I actually don't think that something like this will get as much coverage as, like you said, if something like this happened in a Bellator, one championship, a UFC, it would get a lot of coverage. I feel like this is going to get swept under the rug, and it's unfortunate because I wish nothing but the best for Francesco, Ricci, and you have to feel bad for Noah Cutter too, because he was just trying to be in a fight. He didn't mean for this to happen. But overall, to kind of sum it up, stuff like this unfortunately happens in combat sports. It happens in sports in general, just freak injuries. I remember Richard Zednik used to be like a Canadians legend, or, you know, when I grew up, I was a big Zednik fan, big Saku Koivu fan. Zednik went to play for the Panthers and got his neck sliced by a skate, and it was horrific and terrible to see. He made a recovery. Saku Koivu got hit by a stick blade right under his eye. Terrible injury. I watched it on TV as it happened. Scary stuff like that happens. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunately part of these sports. So hopefully this doesn't fly under the radar. Hopefully, you know, Francesco Ricci is all right and he gets out of this and things are all right for him. And for Noah Cutter as well. You hate to be the guy that unfortunately caused this. It wasn't his fault. But overall, maybe a little bit more oversight, but there's not a whole lot you can do, I don't think.
Yeah, it gets interesting because, you know, a lot of the sports that you speak of already, they're not going anywhere. So stuff like this happens. Listen, guys get paralyzed in the NFL. So I think that, you know, I don't want to say it's unfortunate for BKFC because I don't even know how I feel about BKFC, but it's unfortunate, like you said, for the two fighters that were involved because, you know, to give this the attention it needs also makes the product less appealing. Right? Like if it gets national attention, let's say it ends up on Real Sports or it ends up on, you know, 2020 or Dateline or something, then people are less likely to watch it because of what happened, but that's the attention it needs for the kid that got hurt. So it's a weird situation. I wish everybody the best. I do think it was a freak accident. I don't think it should be overreacted to, but I don't know well enough to make that judgment, and I think it needs to be looked into. All right, Craig, let's move on to sparring sessions. Craig, John Jones and Daniel Cormier are at it again. With John Jones, and I'm paraphrasing here, saying DC sucks, and DC, and I'm paraphrasing here, saying John Jones is a junkie. Craig, and you can paraphrase as well. Who's right?
You see that pause? I don't know. I mean, John Jones saying DC sucks. Well, yeah, he can always hold that over him that he beat him. He beat him twice, right? I don't care about the no contest. He beat him twice. DC saying John Jones is a junkie. Well, the accidents, the field sobriety tests, the failed drug tests, that kind of lends credence. So, I mean, I don't know who's right. Who's more right out of the two? Is DC more right than Jones? Maybe a little bit. But Daniel Cormier is one of the greatest fighters of all time, so he doesn't suck. And John Jones has had some issues in the past, but when he gets into the cage, it's magic. He wins every time, except for the time he hit Matt Hamill the wrong way. So, I don't know. Neither guy's right, really.
You know, DC and John Jones is a very curious situation for me because, you know, you always wish for these guys, you know, Ali, Frazier, all these guys to sort of get over their differences and just be okay. I don't know why we want that. Maybe it's just a society's need to have normalcy and calm. But here's where the thing I can't reconcile with John Jones. If you look at USADA as the most tested athletes, John Jones is far and away the most tested athlete. He has the most passing USADA tests.
What was it? Was it 62?
Right.
Was that the number?
It was 62. Here's what makes so whether or not he has ever used performance-enhancing drugs, he has tested clean the most of anyone. Now, is the reason why he's tested the most because of his issues in the past? Absolutely. And part of the reason why I think this is such a petty disagreement between these two guys is DC still gets tested by USADA. Now, it was said recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the YouTube comments or out there in the world, DC said he just likes to be clean and have the positive tests and all that. He has less positive tests than John Jones. I'm not saying that DC is so petty that he would keep testing himself so that he surpasses Jones on that list. But I am saying that as long as Jones is above him on that list, he will always be able to hold that over DC's head. Like, you can't call me a junkie when I've passed more USADA tests than you have. So there's something to that. I just wish that these guys could figure out a way to get out of each other's lives. And because there's really no need. I wish one of two things. Either the two of them just separate from each other. One of three things. Either they just leave each other the hell alone forever. Or they do the Shaq Kobe interview where they're sitting in chairs facing each other and their like knees are almost hitting. They're so close. Or they end up on like some studio show and they're on the show going back and forth. I've always thought Cruz and Faber would do that well. Either lean into it or just leave each other alone.
What about like a Tito Chuck 3 situation in like 15 years?
In Golden Boy?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. That'd be interesting, yeah. I just don't know, man. Let me ask you this. Are you sick of Jones and DC?
Yeah.
In this capacity?
Yeah, 100%. Like there's no need. It's I don't mind controversy to sell a fight, but when there's no fight to sell, what's the point, right? Like, I just don't see a point to any of this. It's fun for us to talk about it. It's fun for everybody else to talk about it. But at the end of the day, they're just getting under each other's skin. They can't fight about it. What can they do? Have a backyard wiffle ball game, and the guy that wins that determines who wins the argument? Like, what are we gonna do here? I don't know. I'm kind of over it.
There's some guys that it just seems like they're never gonna get past it, right? These two, Rockhold and Bisping, occasionally still take shots at each other. There's guys out there, and it's just like whatever it was that they went through in that Conor and Khabib, to some extent, I think we'll just never get over their issues. All right, let's move on. Craig, I'm excited because I stumbled on this week's Rankum because I was looking up something else, and I was like, wait a second. There sure is a lot going on this month. So what I want to talk about in Rankum this week is it's November. And November is, take a guess.
Is it your birthday?
No, it's my son's birthday on Saturday.
Oh, okay.
That aside, it's the best month in mixed martial arts history. So this week in Rankum, I want to rank the best November fights of all time. Now, we can do this a couple of ways. Your choice. You can either just take it purely by how good the fight was, or you can do it by how big the moment was. Your choice. These are your choices. Michael Bisping versus George St. Pierre. Ronda Rousey versus Miesha Tate. Hughes versus St. Pierre 2. St. Pierre versus Hendricks. Couture versus Lesnar. Shogun versus Hendo. Kane versus JDS, which was the first Fox card. Conor versus Eddie Alvarez. UFC 1, which started the whole thing. And St. Pierre Condit. Now, I just threw that in there because you and I love the promo. Really quick, point of correction. I think it's Rousey Home, but I'll look it up. I think Rousey Home happened this month.
I can feel it coming back again. I love that promo. I'm excited about it now. You're going to have to handhold through this one. We're going to have to work together on it because
let's do it.
I was in and out of MMA. I get into it, 2008, 2009, something like that, for, Shogun, an early Jones and GSP. And then I get out of it around 2011, 2012, about until 2016. I can tell you out of fond MMA memories that I've had, especially getting back into it, Bisping St. Pierre was a huge one. UFC 217, I remember it like it was yesterday, how excited I was for it. And I know another name that's in this list. How excited were you, John, for Johnny Hendricks versus Paulo Costa on that card?
I was over the moon.
UFC 1, I was negative 1 years old. So there's that. And what's the other one on here? Conor Eddie. I remember UFC 205 so fondly because I was just about fully entrenched back in MMA. We were watching every pay-per-view. I'm pretty sure just about every fight night card at that time. And I had a buddy that was like the self-proclaimed biggest Eddie Alvarez fan. And to watch his reactions as Eddie Alvarez tumbled back and forth, it was so much fun. So, you know, being old school, not so much old school, but again, the 2008, 2009 memories to like 2016 on, UFC 217 and UFC 205 hold a lot of water. Obviously, St. Pierre Condit, you know, being in the sport for St. Pierre, that's a huge one. Hughes St. Pierre too, that was a little bit before, I guess it was right in there, right in the wheelhouse. And then St. Pierre Hendricks was obviously there. But I mean, for me, some of them don't hold as much water as some of the others.
So let's do the hand holding.
That's why it's a rank 'em list.
It is. I'll do the hand holding here. We'll come up with a list together. So let's first break down George St. Pierre. He's got a couple of injuries on here. We can safely say the Condit fights the last of the four, right? So St. Pierre Condit would be last. And then Hendricks. Now the Hendricks one that's significant is because everybody thought Johnny Hendricks won. Okay, everybody. so we'll put St. Pierre Hendricks slightly above St. Pierre Condit. All right, now the other two, the second fight with Matt Hughes is the one where he won the belt. And the fight with Michael Bisping is the one where he became a double champ. So which one do you think has more significance there?
Probably the Bisping one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll put Bisping at top.
That doesn't work very well.
And then Hughes. Okay, so we've ranked the St. Pierre one, so those are out of the way. Now, let's talk about the significance of the other fights. Ronda Rousey against Holly Holm. Ronda Rousey was completely unbeatable, smashing everybody. Now, I look at Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm in the same way that I look at Mike Tyson and Buster Douglas. Now, Holly Holm obviously had a better career post Ronda Rousey than Buster Douglas did post Mike Tyson. But, I mean, are you comfortable with that being up near the top three?
I mean, that's one of the biggest underdogs of MMA history hitting right there with Holly Holm. And after that fight, it's pretty hard to find Holly Holm not on the main card of a pay-per-view or at least headlining a fight night. So, I mean, it did wonders for Holly Holm and for Ronda Rousey. Man, how crazy is it? Like, she was the talk at the time was she's going to fight men. She could beat TJ Dillashaw. She could box with men. She was on Ellen. She was in movies. And then it just kind of, she lost. And then it went down. And then she did pro wrestling. And then she fought Nunes. Or no, didn't she take time off? Then she fought Nunes. Then she did pro wrestling. But still, like, it sent her career into such a weird spiral. And for Holly Holm, it made her into a huge star. I don't know if it's all the way up there. I'd say it'd be a middling type of thing.
Okay, so the Shogun, now let's move on to Shogun Hendo. That's probably the best fight of these fights in terms of just a fight. So, if we're ranking that by how great the fights were, it's probably, top three. But in terms of moments in MMA history, it's a little bit lower. Let's talk about Conor and Eddie. Conor and Eddie, I believe, was the highest pay-per-view of all time until Khabib Conor. Was it not?
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah.
And Conor had that made Conor a double champ.
Double champ.
So that has significance. UFC 1 obviously started the whole thing. Randy Couture and Brock Lesnar is one that kind of gets forgotten. Randy Couture had been a 2-weight champion at the time. Brock, so he was in Cooperstown. He was whoever he was.
Pete Rose.
He was Pete Rose. And then Brock Lesnar was this massive guy who, was taking everybody out, and he lost to Frank Mir, but it was a submission, a technicality. So, all right, let's put a list together here. I'll tell you a name, and you tell me which should be higher. All right, Conor and Eddie or Rousey and Holm?
Conor and Eddie.
All right, Conor, Eddie, Rousey, Home. Bisping, St. Pierre, or UFC 1?
It's going to hurt. UFC 1, we wouldn't be here. I mean, I got the flag behind me now in the background with the Hoist Gracie signature on it. That's got to be up there.
Okay, so then
Then
we'll
again,
go.
if I'm not mistaken, on my MMA Mount Rushmore, didn't I have Art Davey?
I think you did. All right, so we got Conor Eddie, Rousey Home, UFC 1, Bisping, St. Pierre. Then we'll go. What about Kane JDS? First fight ever on Fox. It's a horrible fight.
I'm pretty sure that was when I was out, but like I do remember how hyped it was.
Okay, so we'll go Kane JDS. We're putting some things together here. Let's go Hughes St. Pierre.
Yeah.
Couture Lesnar. Those two I can flip flop. Couture Lesnar, and then what do we got left? We got St. Pierre Hendricks and Shogun Hendo. Which one?
Shogun Hendo.
Shogun Hendo. St. Pierre Hendricks. All right, I think we got a good list here. If I missed anything on the, let me know in the comments. I'm sure you will. This is what we ended up with: Conor Eddie, Rousey Home, UFC 1, Bisping versus St. Pierre, Kane versus JDS, Hughes versus St. Pierre, Couture versus Lesnar, Shogun Hendo, St. Pierre Hendricks. Not too bad of a month, Craig. I'm calling it now. Usually we do these things in the DMs. Slide into your DMs and tell you stuff like this. I'm announcing it now. We should do something in the month of November moving forward. We should have November be a seminal month for the podcast, for MMA in general. All right, Craig, let's move on to For the Gram. I'm going to completely lean on you because you have put countless, as although you've counted them, countless hours of time into Bellator this week. So let's talk about Patricio Pitbull. He was successful in his last fight for Bellator. In the grand scheme of things, and we've talked about this recently, but I want to update it because he just had another fight. How good is this kid in the grand scheme of things? Like, how good is he in the world? And is it time to go? Is it time for him to go on to greener pastures?
Nope, because he's one of the biggest Bellator guys, and they just lost. Like, Michael Chandler was your Mr. Bellator. He's gone. Patricio Pitbull's now your Mr. Bellator. And listen, this is weird. Matt Allen asked me this question earlier on this week. And, you know, we're in the MMA media space, so you kind of put on a different ball cap. You take your fan cap off, you put your MMA media member ball cap on. And I'm by no means a journalist, and I would never consider myself one. So I can answer this question in a couple of different ways. But Matt's question to me was, who's your favorite fighter? And I thought, well, Frank, who do I like to watch the most? Who do I, like to follow? And Matt goes, I think your favorite fighter is Gegard Mousasi. And I said, you know what, Matt? I think you're right. I love all things Gegard Mousasi. He's a bit of an enigma. He's an odd guy. He does, interviews. Sometimes he has a good time with it. Sometimes, he hates being there and answering those questions. But he always shows up to fight, and you always get an interesting Gegard. And the guy's got, over 50 pro fights. He's been a Dream champ before at heavyweight. He's your Bellator middleweight champ again. I love watching him. All this to say, I think Patricio Pitbull is still a bigger star than Gegard in the Bellator scheme of things. So to answer it in general, where does he fit in? I honestly think he's a pound-for-pound top 15 fighter in the world right now. He knocked out Michael Chandler to win the lightweight belt. He knocked out Pedro Carvalho to keep his belt last week. He's got a fight coming up against, either the winner of, there's the Emmanuel Sanchez fight, and then on the opposite side of the bracket, it's the winner of Darion Caldwell and AJ McKee, which is tomorrow night. So by the time this comes out, you'll know who won that fight. But all that to say, I think Patricio wins the bracket. I think he keeps his belt. And I think he should just stay in Bellator. Him and his brother, they stir up shit on Twitter. They have a lot of fun. I like watching them fight. Patricio's far more the technician. And overall, I think he's a top pound for pound fighter. I put that out there on Twitter last week after he won, and some people grilled me. But I also looked at their tweets, and they were UFC stands. So there's that. Were you that guy that tweeted me? Was it a burner?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got all kinds of UFC burners. They're just Irish flags, and you know how it goes. So, listen, I'm not going to pretend to know a bunch about this dude. I'm not a big Bellator guy, but I will say this. When I tell you that is it time for him to go, I mean from his perspective. And yeah, he can make a lot of money in Bellator. He's the face of Bellator. So you got to put a price on that. Do you want to be, you know, Justin Gaethje stayed in the World Series of Fighting a little bit longer than maybe he should or could have, and because he's making good money. You know, he would tell you if you asked him, why leave here when I'm not going to make more money in the UFC. Ultimately, he did make more money in the UFC, but it's because of a lot of performance bonuses. I think it's time for this kid to get tested. I mean, he trains with Cejudo. He's in that whole camp. So I think that, you know, he knows. This is where I think a lot of people get a misconstruing of the fight game. Fighters in other organizations know where they stack up because they train in these big gyms and they spar with these guys. Now, is sparring the same as fighting? No. And is fighting in front of, you know, a Bellator crowd and fighting in front of a UFC crowd the same? No. But they kind of have an idea where they stand. And I just think that, you know, before he loses his physical prime, he might want to hop over to UFC and then, you know, stall people out like Chandler stalling them out and then make them wait to fight this guy who's been in a lesser organization for a decade. All right, Craig, let's move on to one Twitter hitter. Craig, the rumor mill, the Underground Whisper Network, says that when TJ Dillashaw returns, it will be against Corey Sandhagen. So it's the Sandman, it's Dillashaw. What are your thoughts?
Is it going to be Dillashaw or is it going to be Fat Tyler?
I don't know if it might not be quite Dillashaw.
Yeah, that's the thing, because like he's not young and he's been gone for a long time, and he did EPO, and who knows how long he was doing EPO for. I'm fine with the fight. You know, when was it? Earlier on in the spring, I think it was like COVID times when TJ Dillashaw came out and said, "Yeah, when I'm back, the UFC guaranteed me a title shot, so up yours." We know that Petrion's going to be fighting Aljamain Sterling. I'd like to see TJ Dillashaw fight the winner of that. Dillashaw is another one of those guys that's on my list. Like, you know, I rarely miss any fights, but I make sure that I'm sitting in front of a screen watching a TJ Dillashaw fight. I love what the guy does in the cage. I've considered him, and I've said this for a long time, I think he's one of the best wrestlers in MMA. The way that he uses his wrestling, uses his scrambles, his striking's great with the Bang Muay Thai system. I think that would make for a great fight. I'm fine with it. I think it'd be good.
You know, when he started having his ascension, a lot of people attributed it to that he was helping
EPO.
Cody Garbrandt. Yeah. Well, before EPO, people were attributing it to that he was helping Cody Garbrandt train for Dominic Cruz. And in doing so, he picked up a style that kind of was a little bit different than the way he started his career. And then you found out about the EPO. And you were like, well, is it the new style that's helping or is it the EPO? So, you know, I don't know that he's deserving of a title shot. But, you know, I do think this. He is a guy with a name. He established that name. Whether he did it clean or dirty is another conversation for another day. But he has a name. So him fighting Petrion is a bigger fight than Marlon Moraes fighting Petrion or Aljamain Sterling fighting Petrion. That's the reality. So whether people like that or they don't like it, that is what it is. So now in terms of the Sandhagen fight, if people are calling Corey Sandhagen, you know, Dominic Cruz's adopted son, in the way that he moves his feet in the cage, then yeah, I think that Dillashaw is a guy that certainly understands that style, has trained for and against it, and I think it'd be interesting. Yeah, I'd like to see that fight. All right, Craig, let's move on to posting to the book. Craig, Donald Cerrone said he's got one more run in him. He's choosing to make this run now that Khabib's retired, which is very fortuitous for him. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. Here's my question. Listen, the Cowboy's going to ride away at some point. Do you think, based on the landscape at 155 pounds, he's got a shot at the belt?
No.
What then? That's fair. What then becomes the fate of Donald Cerrone? Is he just a guy whose job now is to put other fighters over?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, See, it's tricky because you got a fight that was just announced in Matt Brown and Carlos Condit. Fun fight, makes sense for both guys, right? Especially where they're at in their careers. Why can't we do that with Donald Cerrone from now on out? You want him to fight for another 2 years? Just give him fights like that. Now, that's easy to say. Like, Condit's last fight was against Court McGee. That fight made sense. Matt Brown fought Miguel Baeza. He stood no chance in that fight, and he lost that fight. So don't give Cowboy the Miguel Baezas of the world. Don't give him like the up-and-coming prospects, the guys that are knocking everybody out in sparring and in the cage when they actually fight. Give him guys that he's going to beat, or guys that are somewhat on a skill level, because it's no longer WEC Cowboy. It's no longer fighting for an interim belt Cowboy. This is like, I ride a tractor 5 days a week Cowboy, and I spar at night sometimes.
Oh, Craig. Young Craig. Let's talk about this for a second. Do you build a team around Russell Westbrook? Of course you don't. Because Russell Westbrook is old. And he's a high usage guy. So you don't build a team around him because there's no future in it. I understand what you're saying. The question just becomes, what are you trying to get out of Donald Cerrone? Are you trying to get out of Donald Cerrone the ability to market him as a main event fighter and draw money anymore? Because if the answer to that question is no, then the only use that you have for Donald Cerrone left is for him to put young fighters over. So you got to put him in there with those kind of guys, because he's a resume builder now. And if you avoid the resume building, honestly, and this seems like a really rough way to put it, what the hell else is the point of the guy? If he's not there to put a young guy over, why is he here? No one's going to a UFC to see Donald Cerrone anymore. You know, because he's not in a position for that. What is he, a featured prelim guy now? He's a first. Where's he at? Third fight on the main card? Who is he now?
Yeah. Okay, here, I'll throw this at you. So this weekend, UFC 255, Davison Figueiredo, Alex Perez, that fight, not that great. Valentina Shevchenko, Jennifer Maia, not a great fight. What's the fight before that? Do you know what it is? Just off the top of your head?
I don't.
It's Mike Perry, Tim Means. I mean, we just had Mike Perry and Cowboy Cerrone, 2 years ago? So why couldn't you throw Cowboy in and replace Tim Means? And Tim Means taking that fight on short notice.
Yeah, listen, hold on. So the thing with Donald Cerrone is I'm with you. The Donald Cerrone belongs in a legend division. He belongs with fighters that guys like Perry.
He's kind of like Elmer's glue. You can just sprinkle him in there. He holds a bad card together. And if you need to, and I mean, he's non-toxic. Like you could drink it if you wanted. But no, just throw him in as the glue on a bad main card.
Yeah, that's honestly, that's the perfect way to put it. And listen, guys, if you're out there,
Donald Cerrone, that's the right way to put it.
No, that's not the right way to put it. But I think that with these guys, what you got to understand is if they're going to make their run, then so be it. Like Cow Dad or whatever the hell he was called went on a little bit of a run there and it got shut down. But if they're gonna have that existence, like, listen, it's not necessarily over for Carlos Condit. Carlos Condit beats Matt Brown, then you step him up a little bit. If he beats the next guy, that's my point. No, I'm not saying he's going to do that. But my point is that if these guys are going to go on a run, they're going to go on a run no matter what. So put them in there with whomever you think is going to push the promotion forward. If you put him in there with a young stud and he takes that kid out, then so be it. All right,
John. So we're going to move on to start the conversation. As we always say, shouts to r/MMA over on Reddit. And this week we posed the question, how can the UFC fix their weigh-in issues? And underneath, I typed in this bracket here. So we asked, with so many fighters missing weight and having fights canceled last weekend, do you think the UFC would ever implement a one championship / boxing style weight cutting program? Without full transparency, we'll never know what happens over in Singapore, but the concepts are there. And John, I'd like to get your reaction to this one, and then we'll see what the fine folks on the underground had to say. But it's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. I'm from the camp that if you're doing this weight cutting for it's this weird like bit of gamesmanship where, so let's say you and I are fighting and and we're fighting at 55, and I walk around at 185 and you walk around at 160, right? So you only have to cut 5 pounds. So my thought there is, okay, I'm going to cut to 55 so that when I rehydrate, I'll have a substantial advantage over you, which works, but in very small cases because most guys are doing that. Most guys are walking around 15 or so pounds heavier, cutting down and bulking back up. So then the question becomes, why not just fight at the weight that you're bulking up to? So for me, I think safety's sake, safety-wise, you shouldn't put these guys through the process of having to make the weight. Now, the only thing that I can't account for, which I would either have to do more research into or ask a fighter, is does the process of weight cutting give you that razor edge that you need to be a more effective fighter? And if you just worked, because realistically, Craig, these guys are training at the other weight. So they're getting in shape, right? So God knows if they're training at 180 and walking around at 180 and they're fighting at 155, then obviously they're going through full camps. They're getting their workouts in and maintaining a 180 weight. So that's a healthy weight for them because they're training at it. So why then cut to this weight that's unhealthy only to bulk up back up to your training weight? I think it's a question of training weight and weigh-in weight.
So I agree with you, and you can see him right there. You got Mr. Volkan Oezdemir and you got Anthony Smith. And to me, Anthony Smith is one of those premier examples. Now, how's his career going right now? Transition to broadcasting? But overall, when he was going into that fight with Volkan Oezdemir, he had the Rashad Evans, the Shogun Rua, the Volkan Oezdemir, the title shot. He didn't have to worry about cutting weight to go down to 185, and all of a sudden he's a force at 205, and he attributed it to the fact that he didn't have to cut weight anymore. His endocrine system wasn't bouncing around all over the place, and he could kind of level out. And like you said, I mean, for him at the time, training at altitude, Factory X, and, you know, the cardio was improved. I didn't have to worry about the weight cut. All those things combined really worked out great for him. Now, if I look over on Reddit, Freshly Written 69, the top comment said, the downside to hydration testing, which is what One Championship claim they do and what boxing does, which NCAA wrestling uses, what he says, are beatable. Guys are going to always try and have every advantage possible. Another comment from CFC Fire says, introduce sacrifices. For every pound overweight, you lose a toe. I mean, that's a pretty good one, right?
Fair.
Frankie LFRR said easily, they just have to weigh fighters multiple times during fight week at random hours. Unfortunately, it's not happening before we have a high-profile death due to weight cutting. Lefty UFC saying have the fighters weigh in 10 minutes before the fight. If the fighters know they don't have any time to cut weight and cut and put the weight back on in such a short amount of time, they won't cut weight. If fighters don't cut weight, then they won't miss weight. It's a pretty good one.
I like that one. Actually, that was the one.
Black Jazz Society is saying helium. Maybe helium would help. And then one of the more in-depth ones from Ned Stark was a fool says they could easily expand USADA to also do surprise weight checks when they piss and make an upper limit for how much your weight class can be out of camp. So suppose the absolute limit is over 10% of your division limit. If you're at 155 pounds, USADA comes to take your piss. You also need to immediately weigh in at 170.5 pounds or less. If you weigh more at the random weight check, then your next fight will be at welterweight. This sounds like a big punishment, but for extremely large welterweight fighters, they'd also be bumped to middleweight under the system because, again, 10% above 170 is 187. If you still need to drop the 10% allowance for the official fight weight in at 155 pounds, this would stop lightweights from ballooning up to 190, 195, even rumored 200 plus out of camp. If you're a lightweight, you should live as a lightweight. I chose 10% as an example because it works out close to the actual divisional differences, but it could be some other percentage. I just want to show the concept. Well, I will say to Ned Stark was a fool. You're no fool. I like that answer. I actually do. I think that's another really good one. There's a ton of answers. In total, there was something like 35 comments. So that's pretty cool. And hopefully this reaches the underground. I don't think there's any magic bullet, but maybe weighing fighters before they come in. I always thought hydration testing was good, but again, you can pretty easily fake it or rig the system. You can't rig it with a percentage-based scale. and you can't really rig it if you're weighing somebody as they walk into a ring.
Yeah, I like that answer as well. I think that he really took into account. My big question there would be, and if I heard him correctly, he did account for this, would be that your next fight is at welterweight, meaning that you could have all sort of weight issues in camp and your opponent isn't penalized for it. That would be my concern. Like if the USADA situation is if you pop for USADA, the fight's off. But the situation with the weight would be, okay, just because my weight's off doesn't mean my opponent should lose a fight. But if the next time you say, no, next fight's 170, we don't care. So then I like that.
California, if I'm not mistaken, has done things like that before. Like I remember Drew Dober had such a hard time making 155 that they basically kind of put in a provision that, hey, your next fight's at 170 pounds unless you can show that you can safely make a cut back down to 155. And then I think his next fight was in like Nevada, and it doesn't even matter what California said. You can just keep fighting in Nevada. So it's always tricky having different commissions. And I mean, we know that the Nevada State Athletic Commission are just a bunch of sketch bags, especially if you watch that Terrence Crawford, Kell Brook card, the fight before it with the stupid replay. And John, you know something? You're a boxing guy and I'm not, right? So UFC get done and I'm sitting here and I'm working on the computer and I thought, you know what? Fuck it. Let's watch some fucking boxing. Like, I know Terrence Crawford. I know Kell Brook. There's probably going to be another fight on. Let's just flip it over and we'll watch it. Man, that was dumb. Like, that made me not want to watch boxing. Yeah. I don't have faith in that commission. And the shame is, those are the same people that look after MMA.
Yeah, it's true. Hey, I gotta do some hunting around and see what Teddy Atlas had to say about that. I was like, Teddy goes deep. So if you had a problem with that fight, I'm sure Teddy had a problem with it. All right, guys, there you have it. This episode of Early Stoppage Fight Night Picks is in the books. Be sure to comment on the video to let us know what you'd like to see next from the show here on YouTube, but also on iTunes and Spotify. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FNP. I can be followed at SM Cornerman. The fight has been stopped. We'll see you next week. Craig, say something witty.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Shouts to Matt Allen. Big week for Matt Allen.